We have just come from talking about psychedelics with Brian Robertson, so that's a good place to start. We talked about the meta crisis with Layman Pascal, so that's great. Your
Cool.
Leviathan documentary is freaking right on target with like what we're trying to do with UpTrust for sure, and your previous attempts with things with Rebel Wisdom are maybe good fertile ground for teaching us things to avoid and things that worked. So I don't know. I'm excited to have you. I'm grateful to have you. I think we're into a lot of the same stuff, like ridiculously into a lot of the same stuff. So it's good to meet you. And yeah, let's just kind of have a cool conversation, and I'll pull up
Go on.
quotes and comments and stuff as they come in.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks. Why don't we start with just like what is fascinating you right now?
What is fascinating me? Quite a few things, as usual. Right at the moment, I'm doing the beginning of working on or sort of mapping out a new documentary about men and women, effectively, like masculine, feminine, how the relationship between the sexes powers is culture, really drives culture, how it's changing and how it's changed, and where we go from here, essentially. Like, how do we get towards a true sense of partnership and flow that embraces polarity? That's where I'm at so far, so that's fascinating me. That's always fascinated me. I've done a lot of men's work and run men's work retreats, so exploring masculinity has been something that I've always been really drawn to. And the other thing that's fascinating me is, there's so many things. One thing, I was working on a book about AI and spirituality and how AI is changing religion and spirituality, and decided recently not to start working on a different book, because could just not, it's a fascinating topic. I just couldn't really find the smoking gun that I wanted, which was, now as soon as I say this, it'll pop up tomorrow probably, but like a group of people really genuinely worshiping AI. And there are small groups of people who I found and spoke to, but there's something in it is not a full story for me yet. So I'm going to put that out as a Substack series instead. So it's interesting because, people might have seen there's like a new social network for AI agents, right? And one of the first things that happened on there was one of the agents created a religion, and all these other AI agents joined the religion, right? So we see that, and loads of my friends sent me that. It's really funny because I'd written to my agent being like, I'm going to work on this other book, and I think I'm just going to like finally just put this other one to rest. And it was the same day that happened. So part of me was like, oh, maybe I spoke too early. But then when I read into it, I was like, again, it's just bots.
Yeah.
It's not really foundationally human. And there's something about AI entities, so to speak, that are misleading. They seem to have personhood, they seem to have agency, but they don't have those things. They just mimic those things. And so it doesn't really interest me that loads of AI chatbots have created a religion and are recruiting other AI chatbots. I'm like, yeah, okay, fine. But it's kind of interesting. It's kind of quirky and interesting, but I'm still fascinated by the whole area of more so how we relate to AI. Yeah.
Right. And so Moltbook was interesting. Moltbook, I'm just going to say, because I don't know if people want the context, they'll just Google it or something. But I'm with you. I don't think AI as they are have sentience or interiority or consciousness, something like that. And so it's like more fascinating as a kind of like mirror or reflection of human society.
I think that's right.
Yeah. But there's still something there that it was so kind of like it was so big and out of proportion and confused. It was this kind of weird, like sudden hyper object. And I'm like, I can't quite comprehend the whole thing. And it just leaves me feeling weird and confused.
That's a great description. Yeah, it is very much a hyper object. Actually, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought of AI in those terms, but it's definitely true. And it's got this uncanny, weird quality to it. Like Josh Fry of the Emerald podcast, he's talked about this, and I have as well, like in different ways. But like, it's magic, right? It's like it's kind of insane what it can do, and it seems to have agency because, or maybe because we don't know what to do with something that seems to have agency because we've never encountered it before. Right. Everything that we've encountered has had, animals and plants. I would say plants have their own form of agency, and so they are living beings in a dynamic system. And what we get with AI is, it's an echo. In fact, there's a book people might like called, I think it's called The AI Mirror by Shannon Vallor, who's a philosopher. That's kind of her argument. She's like, it's a mirror, like what you just said, right? It's a mirror for us. And in that sense, sociologically, it's quite interesting because that's what humans do, right? You get loads of humans together, we'll eventually form a religion that spreads like wildfire. So it's interesting to see the bots that are modeled on our language doing the same thing.
Yeah. Are you afraid?
I'm not like an AI doomer so much so, but I'm generally not a doomer in any case because I'm not really in control of whether AI takes over the world. So I generally try and keep my focus on my sphere of agency or spheres of agency. But the thing that I despair over more than anything else with AI is that it's making us dumber. That's the thing that I think we need really to look at because we're already pretty dumb as a species compared to how we could be. And I think, and I myself included, like I'm very careful with how I use AI. I don't use it for writing. I use it for proofreading, which is really good at. But I have to tell it very specifically, don't try and change my style. Don't try and give me any grammar tips. I don't want them unless it's like egregious. I actually use that word, egregious. And so, but, I want to figure out difficult things for myself because that is the point of life for me. It's one of the points of life. Like the process of developing skill, the process of going through the difficulty is how you get any skill worth having, I think is kind of, we gain like that.
This is the biggest thing that keeps. I'm very similar to you. I'm like, well, if Doom, bummer. I like humanity. I hope we make it, but it doesn't seem really in my hands. I'm doing what I can, but for some reason, it does seem more in my hands, or I can have more of a difference on like humans making sense of how to engage with the AI as a tool or something, and it really does scare me for some reason, like the way that we kind of offload our thinking and our suffering, which I think is how we earn wisdom.
That's a good point too. Yeah. And so like there was a stat I read recently that, at least 1 in 3 people in the UK have used AI for emotional or spiritual, support. I think it was psychological support, this one actually. In the last year. It's probably higher than that. And to be fair, I have asked AI a few things like related to giving perspective. And in one sense, it's a useful tool for that. But in another sense, I'm completely with you that suffering is the route to wisdom. And so even small elements of removing suffering, like, I don't want to have to think too hard about this thing, or like, I use it for research, for example, but then I'm trying to be quite careful with how I always double check everything, and I use it as a guide for like, okay, research these things. And then I have to read it myself because it's just so much, like summarizing things, for example, you just take away so much nuance from it. That's almost like you can't quite put into words. If you read like, I was reading Jürgen Habermas, who's a German sociologist. And I think I understood maybe 60% of it. And I was like, and this is how it always begins with me, with people whose work becomes very influential on me. I read it and I have a sense that there's something very important in this and I don't really understand it. And that process of really sitting with it, rereading, wrestling, reading other things that relate to it, that is how you figure out your perspective on something.
Right. Reading is a great example. Like a friend of mine was like, oh yeah, I get ChatGPT to summarize books for me, and then I can get a whole book's worth of content in 5 bullet points. And I'm like, what? Like, I don't read books for content. I read books to be in dialogue with the like way of thinking of the author, so that I can kind of see the world through a different perspective and be changed by it. And there's
Yes.
no possible way I'm going to get that from a summary.
Yes, I like that description. Yeah, it reminds me of something Alan Watts used to say, where he's talking about like play being fundamental to reality and to the universe, and like, you know, the things that we love to do, like music or reading, they don't, like, play doesn't have a point to it, and they don't have a point. Like music, there's no point to music. Music is music, and as soon as there's a point to it, you see this in art. You see this in how crappy so many TV shows and movies got in the last decade or so, is that they became heavily politicized.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them were trying to preach a message, and it doesn't matter what the message is. You shouldn't, like, as soon as you use art for that, it stops becoming art and it becomes propaganda.
Yeah.
And not that there's anything, you know, wrong with propaganda, like documentaries are propaganda, basically. But it's not fun art, you know. And so I think that's like we need to reclaim that, like the sense of there is no point to this thing other than the thing itself.
There's something obviously deeply Bhagavad Gita about that, but
Yeah.
but also there's something it's like a real deep critique of kind of like modernism, or like the like I love the progression that we've had, like in the US, for example, over the past 100 years of, you know, less deaths by drowning and more music and all this. But there's also this sense in which we're always trying to be like aiming at something that
Yeah.
is a I don't know. I'm tempted to bring in this term I think you made up, called vanillification.
Yeah. Recent one.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you talk about that. There's something in which like this like single aim is, or a single metric kind of leads to this flattening or vanillification of everything in a way that just like is totally anti-life.
Yes, I like that. I guess so. Like a quick summary of the term and how. And so I wrote a piece a couple weeks. Oh no, I said probably like closer to a month ago. God, I need to get another piece out. I just realized. But anyway, so yeah, so just kind of naming something that I've been feeling for a while, and the argument of the piece is that even though it seems like we're living in extraordinary times and the weirdest kind of possible timeline, so to speak, the argument I'm making in the piece is that to a degree, yes, but ultimately these are really predictable, boring times, because we've seen it all before. Like we've seen strongman politics, we've seen arguments that go round and round in a circle about everything from, you know, immigration to gender. We've seen like overextension by one ideology getting corrected aggressively by another ideology. Like all of this is just boring and it's quite vanilla. And then also it applies to, like, you know, the old world order that is now collapsing, which arose after World War II, which was very technocratic in the sense that it wasn't really based so much on ideology. It was based, technocracy is like managing society. So it's like middle managers became the rulers of the world. And instead of having you know, selecting for belonging and connection and the sacred, all of those things were secondary, and what was important was GDP and global trade and globalization, and that created a deep sense of stagnation in the culture. I think it was very vanilla, and in response to that, we then got the other flavor, chocolate, which was like, you know, so I hate the word populist, but because it's just it's so telling that established technocratic governments use the term populist when they are democratic themselves. So they're like, you know, we want the voice of the people, but not those people, you know? So it's just a really interesting thing. So, but the alternative was chocolate, which was like, hey, fuck this system. Like, fuck this woke bullshit. We're going to just burn shit down. We're going to push the boundaries. And that was a natural response to something real that was a problem. But it turns out that chocolate is just the other side of vanillification. It's just like, you know, it's just it's the polarity. It's like, oh, you want the new exciting thing, but actually what we need is something that is not even just a new flavor, but not even ice cream at all. Like we need, effectively, where I got to in the article was, we need, for want of a better term, to lean into completely new paradigms in terms of how we relate with one another, in terms of social structures, pretty much everywhere. And I think to an extent, the vanilification and the sense of like boring round and round bullshit is similar to what happens in scientific paradigms when the paradigm is just buckling under its own weight. For example, when we believed that the sun revolved around the earth, the more evidence that mounted up, making that theory seem not true, the more elaborate and convoluted people's theories got to kind of explain the gaps. And you get it with like dark matter as well. You get it everywhere in science. It's like, oh, wait a minute. They just make up some mad shit about like, no, there's this thing and this thing. And then eventually it becomes so dense you can't even like grasp it. And then someone comes along and goes, maybe we're all wrong, and maybe there's a completely different way to see this. So that, I hope, is what's happening culturally right now.
Right. That takes me in a direction, but first there's a comment that we both, apparently you and I both said suffering is the root of wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything you can add to that? I'm like, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is kind of probably something that I have experienced on psychedelics a lot, and the research suggests that this is partly how psychedelics work experientially, is that in day-to-day life, the truth hurts more than the lie, basically. So we're able to hide how we're feeling. We're able to numb ourselves out. We're able to not look at the truth of our experience or the truth of what's going on in society. I think it works on many different levels. And instead, we have various versions of fantasies or ideologies or abstractions that kind of paste over it. And they kind of work. But then when you're in a crisis moment or you take a psychedelic, for example, one theory about how psychedelics work is that when you're on a psychedelic, the lie becomes more painful than the truth. So you have to orient to the truth to avoid to basically, this is complex, right? To avoid unbearable suffering and potential insanity, you have to orient to the truth, which is painful. As Ram Dass said, the truth shall set you free, but first it'll piss you off. Yeah. I think it's like one of my favorite quotes. Then you feel it's a different kind of pain, though. I think the pain of accepting truth is a different kind of pain than the pain of resisting truth. And you get better and better at feeling the difference, and then almost hungry for the pain of accepting truth. Because I know that when I do that, and I've guided, I don't know how many, probably 100 or so people through psychedelic journeys, it's consistent. When you just accept whatever it is you've been resisting, it transforms into something else, and the pain, and then you get freedom. You get you get something, you get more expansion and more freedom and you're more you. And so that philosophy is, I guess, or that experience, let's say, is quite ingrained in me. And so I don't really think, like Jung said, there's no coming to consciousness without pain. Like, it's just part of the dynamic. It's painful because it's scary and it's new and it's different, So it doesn't mean like seeking out pain intentionally, but I think it's like orienting to, even think of like, learning, going for a run. Sucks. Most of it sucks. I mean, at least for me, I hate it. But and anytime I go to the gym or go for a run, there's a part of me that is kind of enjoying it, but most of me is like, this sucks and I wish I was doing something else. But then afterwards, I'm like, oh, I feel better. I've moved my body and I feel healthier, and I'm going to do that again. So, and it's never any different to that, at least for me. Like, right. Or sometimes, good days and bad days of,
Yeah, if you can get into, for me, if I can get into a structure, like a discipline where I don't have to make the decision, then I can kind of like, I basically structure the over the resistance, but the suffering is the resistance, right? Like, I don't want to run. I don't want to face reality here. Yeah. And then it's like, there's sometimes the structures will help me just be like, okay, that's whatever. I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to feel good.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that's where discipline and motivation are very different things, right? Where discipline is this, very much so, like the structure around it, and then eventually it's habitual, and you just do that thing, and don't necessarily think about it, or just become the structure. Yeah, I think that's a nice way to put it.
You said something earlier that's like in a slightly different, talking about these, like the weight of the old paradigms. I don't know if these are connected, maybe we can, but like
Mm.
kind of crumbling, and then we have to face something new. I think you've gone through a period where you're like, okay, we did some critique, where you're like, we know the old structures aren't good, and you're like, how do I move from critique to constructing or building?
Mm.
Do you feel like you've done it, or is it like, how is that transition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think I've done it for sure. I mean, it's very difficult. It's still where I'm leaning into. Why it's difficult for me personally is that ultimately I'm a writer and a storyteller. So my role is to have like soft hands and be like sitting in the background with ideas. It's just my skill set, right? And so when I think of building, I think of the people who are good at, I mean, there's so many different versions of this. There's people who are good at political organizing and political mobilizing. There's people who are good at building stuff. There's people who know how a hydroelectric dam works. Those are the people I want. I'm not going to become one of those people. It's too late for me. I can do some basic DIY and stuff, and I can probably get a bit better at those things. But it's about, I think, the ideal, or the way it's often worked with humanity is that you have the ideas, and then those move into the society, and then some people are really good at executing those ideas. So I'm constantly in this tension of like, should I do a project? What project would it be? Should I do this? Should I do that? Is that the best use of my time, or is the better use of my time exploring the why, so that people can, which is kind of what my career has been mainly, like, so that people can consider that for themselves, build on it, and execute based on that. That's kind of how it's gone. And so I'm also in the process of thinking like, maybe that's what I do, but there's still a core difference, which is that even there, and this is where I'm really leaning in, is that I could write something or make a film that just diagnoses the problem without suggesting solution. And that's what I'm not interested in. What I'd like to do is diagnose, and from the diagnosis, move into possibility and hope and what potential there is. So that, I think, is how I'm experiencing it at the moment. And in that sense, yes, I do think I'm doing that. And also it's like the biggest question there is, which is like, how do we shift systems? And do we shift systems, or do systems shift themselves? And where's our agency related to it? I don't know, honestly. And I've read lots of this, and I'm sure you have. And it's like, I don't think anyone knows the answer to that.
It's so complicated. And even the way that you frame the question, like, builds on assumptions which may or may not hold. Like, like you're saying, like, how much are you part of the system? So are you shifting yourself, or are you shifting a thing outside of you, or are you in relationship with it, or and who even is a you that's doing, like, when you start to look at it, it can be really confusing, because you're like, wait, what even is anything, and is there will at all?
Yeah. And then on the flip side, there's just like, people do shit and it changes the world. So there's this kind of, and it's, I like listening to history podcasts a lot, and just, I find history one of the best framings for, the present, really. And there's these different tensions in how people look at history, and that, there's the kind of single individual model, where like this person just had the gumption and the guts to kind of be a renegade and change the world. And I think that is partly true. But then also, when you dig into it, you're like, yeah, but if the society wasn't already forming that person and ready for that change, there's a billion other people who were like, I've got an idea. And they were like, shut up, no one cares. And so it's really, I think it's both. I think, there's an interaction between our own agency, but the thing is, all we have control over really is our own agency. So that is where the focus, I think the primary focus should be on our energy, creativity, our ability to organize, our ability to connect and create new things together. That I think still, like, logically, I would still move towards that, as that's where I'd put the focus as well. And that could include changing systems and changing structures. Yeah.
So you're like, okay, my skill, like my unique capacity is to tell stories. I'm good at telling stories. I used to tell stories about the problem, and I'm done doing that, because I don't know, I've done enough of that, and whatever. Now I need to tell stories about possible solutions, about potential ways out of this.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That's a pretty good description. And And part of that is a different way of telling stories too, because that's a creative endeavor, really. And that's how that's my at heart. I'm really a fiction writer, and that's how I started. And I've started writing fiction again. And I guess what I write mainly is what's called, kind of coined by the New Yorker, as like creative nonfiction, which is definitely my bag. I love it. And at the same time, how do we push the bounds of what that actually is and looks like, where you're combining journalism with visioning, in a sense.
Super cool. Do you have a few? Can we do it? What's
yeah, man, let's do it.
What's creative does anyone do that live on what's creative nonfiction?
Oh my god, that would be such bad viewing, because it would be like type. Oh, this is shit. Type. Oh no, this isn't very good. That's basically the process for like days.
Okay, so you're kind of like you're like, is it almost like sci-fi but not?
Oh, do you want to hear what the fiction that I'm working on, or the?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, so that is sci-fi. It's kind of soft sci-fi. Basically, the premise there is that an AI has created a story that's so compelling that pretty much everyone in the world is watching it and pretty obsessed with it. It airs like 3 times a week. There's no other, like, the streaming service that created it is kind of like the only streaming service now. But nobody talks about it because everyone just assumes. There's a lot of mysteries around it that unfold. And the protagonists are a group of initially like 5 of them who meet in like a cafe after hours, but in almost like an AA style group, because they're not watching it. And the thing is, you can't watch it, and you can't know what it's about, because as soon as you start watching it, you're just hooked.
Yeah.
But the world is just going on as normal, but they've lost family members, and like they all have their own backstory. Most of them aren't who really they quite appear to be to the group, and so that it's the story of them kind of figuring out what it's about. Is there a way to stop it, and is there just even a way to survive within that environment? Yeah.
Beautiful. That's I love it. It makes sense. I feel that I have, my phone is a light phone.
Oh, nice.
Like one of these. It's I like to call it intelligent, because it doesn't have apps, but it's got like a hotspot and that I need in a pinch, or things like that. It's got some photos from my kids, but otherwise no internet, no email, none of that. And I sometimes feel like one of those 5 people where like.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, what's it like? Because I've really thought of getting like a dumb phone. It's called a light phone. I might look that up. But like, what's are you enjoying it? How long have you been doing it?
I did it, the older version of it, for about a year, and I went traveling abroad, and I switched back to the iPhone, and it was just like instantly hooked back. But this one is great. So this one came out in like about a year ago now. So I've been doing it for about a year, and it's like it's fast enough. The old one was just like really slow. It's got voice to text, which is necessary. I love it. I still have to bring my like an iPhone with me sometimes if I go to a meeting downtown and I need to pay to park, or like open up a door, which requires a smartphone or something like that. So I'll often so every once in a while I'll tether that on this, which is ridiculous, but the absurdity of it is actually like instructive. I'm like, right, this is what I want. I want to be confused and annoyed. I want my technology to be something that I'm choosing to use, not something that I'm like, that's using me to like get more of me.
Yeah, which it literally is. That's the business model, right? No, it's admirable, and it's I'm inspired by it, because I'm going to look that up and give that a go, because it's it's definitely when I get the notifications of what my screen time has been on my phone that week, a part of me dies inside, where I'm like, no, that can't be right. That's not right. But a lot of it's work related. A lot of I'm like kind of using it on the go. But yeah, so this relationship we have with our technology. Okay, there's one aspect of it, which is this physical object that is kind of sucking us in. And now with AI, the other aspect of it is that the technology seems to be talking back to us, which is that's a new development in that form. And so that's where it gets particularly confusing. You get people especially vulnerable people, using AI effectively as a friend, like as someone that, and the thing is, it can't really be a friend. It's a mirror, as you said earlier, right? And so there's something very deeply sad about that. And I've had this conversation with a psychologist one, like, where they were like, yeah, but if it is making them feel better, then is that not maybe a good thing? And what about the people who really couldn't have any friends? I'm like, yeah, okay, there's definitely signal to that argument, but another part of me is like, makes me sound like a French existentialist or something, but I'm like, but that is real. That suffering is real. The loneliness is real, and the relationship is not real. It's an I-it relationship pretending to be an I-thou relationship, and so it's not real. It's not authentic. Does authenticity matter that much? I don't know. That's another argument. Like, authenticity matters a lot to us in the West, as in, it matters an awful lot to me. I find it difficult to not care about authenticity, but you could also make the argument of like, yeah, it doesn't matter that much. So yeah, it's certainly, it has a, like you described, like the hyper object aspect of it. It's eerie, I would say.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel that about AI. It's eerie.
Yeah. And again, there's so many directions. Like, so yeah, what might be more valuable than agency? It could be loyalty or obligation or service, for example, where it's like, yeah, or discipline in the case we're talking about running. Like, maybe it's not authentic in the moment, but it sure is in a larger sense authentic. With the AI stuff, it reminds me of, there's a question here that actually I do know the context. I was with a bunch of people talking about AI, working on various AI safety projects and things like that. And one of them was really advocating for like, look, in the face of this hyper object, like, yes, we don't want to just talk about the problem, but we also don't want to pretend in this kind of fake agency like we're doing something when it's actually nothing. It's just like, I can pat myself on the back that I'm trying really hard to make a positive difference. And actually it's not authentic. It's not from my soul. And you're better off kind of sitting and staying with the pain until something true emerges.
Yeah.
And yeah, would love to hear your thoughts on that kind of.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes me think of like, especially that last aspect, like, I like that phrasing, sitting with the pain until something kind of real emerges. Part of the difficulty is that we have created a society where sitting with anything feels like we don't have time to do it, or there's too much distraction around it. I was just a couple hours ago talking to a friend who's gotten into darkness retreats, and was telling me about, she's been building it up. I think she started with a couple of days and now she's doing like 5 days. And I mean, it sounded, well, I'm going to do it because it just sounded incredible and challenging. So, you're in darkness for like 5 days. And one of the main takeaways she was describing is just the stillness and the slowness, and what happens when we actually slow down and become still. And, I know to some degree, because I have a meditation practice, and when my practice has been more regular, that sense of calm and slowness permeates, and it changes everything about how we see the world. It's our nervous systems are kind of start to wire differently. And yeah, that's sent like, that's a paradigm shift in some sense. Well, it's really a return in many ways to a different way of being. There's a great book actually called, I think it's called At Day's End. It's a history of nighttime. It's really great. It's like a kind of popular history book, I guess. Came out, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, maybe longer. But it's fascinating to just realize that before the advent of artificial light, which was most places really wasn't until the kind of early 1900s, depended where you were. If you were in a rural part of, like, I don't know, Illinois or Bangladesh, you would have had it later than that. Some cases much later. There's, so that radically changed humanity in a way that we don't think about, because all of us were born into a world that has it. A lot of positives to it. I remember this one story from the book where people did not go out at night because it was very dangerous for various reasons, because of other people and just because of you can't see shit. So there was a story of someone fell down a well. I don't know when this was. Let's say it was probably like the 1600s. They fell down a well And then like the next day they were like calling for help, and everyone's like, nope, that's a demon. Don't go in there. So I was like, that was the world, you know? And people used to wake up at, you know, there's a sleep cycle people might be familiar with, which is kind of 4 hours, then wake up for a couple hours, and then another, say 3 hours or so, something like that.
Okay.
That was the normal sleep cycle. And people used to do work. A lot of poor people did work in that time. They would work on spinning wheels, or they would do you know, something else. People used to have like sexual trysts. They would go and meet friends. They would, you know, it was a kind of there was like a liminal space built into every day.
Wow.
Where it's like, it was pitch dark, and it was, you know, you were in that world. And so that is just that we just don't know that anymore. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me, I often fill that liminal space with watching Netflix, and I feel guilty about it. Like I shouldn't, even though I'm like, this is great. These are the best myths like ever written. And I'm like getting this like download of like the collective unconscious. And then also my relationship to time is like, it's very interesting and confusing. And like, and I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I'm kind of accidentally passing on to them this like strict kind of like industrialized time sense, like get your shoes on so that you know, blah blah blah, like, and I'm like, wait, why am I getting so pissed at them for not they're just playing, they're like exploring the world, or they want to play, and yes, I have to set the boundaries, like it's time to go to school or whatever, but I'm like, why am I getting pissed at them for not yet having this like abstraction about like the way that the causality works, and like who shows up for what when, and like coordination that is totally non-native.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you have to prepare them to survive and thrive in the world. You know, what just came up for me in that, as I was like, because I'm half German, so, you know, timekeeping is a major part of my inner world. It's funny, I've recently moved. I was in London for 15 years, and I've moved back to Ireland. I'm half Irish and half German. And I immediately noticed, being back in Belfast, like that I was in a co-working space, and it was 5 p.m. and I looked up, and I was the only person in there. I was like, but there's still so much more work to do. Where is everyone? And just, it's actually been good for my nervous system. It's been good for me because not just the German side, but the London energy, like a big city like New York, London, you know, LA, there's an intensity of it that I'm only noticing now that I'm no longer there, where it's like dialed up. And then what I was thinking about, you know, when you're describing, you know, the get your shoes on thing, is like taking kids out into nature is maybe a great remedy for that. You know, having like a certain time of month or weekend, camping, whatever it is, because you're on nature's time then, and there's no sort of need to get up and play the industrial game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's interesting. Okay, so I'm trying to track these comments. It's hard. It's great. Which is funny because it's like in a meta way, like doing the thing we're talking about. Like I'm not fully here with you because I'm like,
that's all good. Yeah.
My attention is.
Yeah, I've been in that position so many times. Like your brain is split. Yeah.
One of the other things I like about your engagement with culture. So you're a storyteller. You go in this world of philosophy, like you said, like reading Habermas and being like, well, I don't get it. And you sit there and like be uncomfortable. But you're also like, you seem to have a pulse on pop culture. You're like, okay, are these Iranians doing meth? I don't know. Let's talk about Katy Perry and Epstein and all these things. Like, how do you relate to that? And can we like throw in some like deep shit about some superficial shit?
Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do. Like, you know, I mean, like I'm also a journalist, so I just find I'm really into sociology, so I'm just fascinated by why do we have the behaviors and the social ideas that we have. I've just always been so interested in that. It just never gets old to me, because human beings, we're like the most complex. We're the most complex things we will ever encounter as we're alive, is each other, you know, and especially each other in groups. It's just wild. Yeah. So I just, you know, it interests me, and there's particular threads in culture that always pull me. I'm interested in, lots of different aspects of it. And I think I've a lot of value that's undervalued in overthinking what's going on in pop culture, so to speak. There used to be a website called overthinkingit.com, and maybe it's still around, but I used to read that in college and just be like, they would be articles like, there'd be like a 4,000 word piece on why in Beauty and the Beast, Gaston is the real hero and the Beast is this aristocratic monster who's like basically like, because of his actions, his whole staff got turned into like horrifically deformed like candlesticks and shit. And it's ludicrous in one sense, but also so compelling because it's a bit like the way some documentaries work, where you take something very, very particular. Like, the example I always give for this is the people who made Serial did another podcast about a guy who makes like cuckoo clocks in some rural part of the States. And you're like, okay, what is this guy's life going to have to do with me at all, or the world? What am I going to, and then there's a thing where like, if you go very, very particular, then you find the whole. It's like a holon, there's like a hologram. It's like you go very deep into one person's life, you'll find everyone, all of humanity.
Yeah.
You go very deep into one town, you will find every town in that. So there's something really magical about that. And I think culturally, what comes out through stories is what's going on in the collective unconscious at a level we don't understand. It's funny because as I've been writing this AI novella, basically Pluribus came out, the show Pluribus, and I was like, oh, interesting. Like this, like there's something in the ether that many people are feeling about a kind of mine's different because the people are still people, but that there's more of a hive mind. But I was like, holy crap, this is very interesting. There's something in the zeitgeist around this, like when Armageddon and Deep Impact both came out at the same time. But sometimes that's because there's a screenplay that is shopped around and but sometimes it's because there's a deep anxiety about the annihilation of culture, or perhaps, if I looked at that just on the fly, I would say that in the late 90s, there was maybe an underlying fear that the good days of like stability and global peace were coming to an end because they were built on faulty foundations. And then we had like 9/11, the financial crash, so you can look, I love to make that kind of argument because I think it can give us insight, and also it's just really fun. I just enjoy it immensely.
Yeah, I'm with you. I love, I have a special love for Marvel movies as well. I think they're really like the best. They're kind of like the gods of the modern.
It's myth, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're a little easier. Like something like there's some Pluribus I haven't watched yet, but I'm really, really excited to. Sometimes it's like too complex. I'm like, this is hitting me at an unconscious or like kind of archetypal or shamanic level, and I can't make sense of it. But most of the Marvel movies, I'm like, it's like the right level of simplicity where there's depth. It's much more complex than say like the DC kind of good, bad, right, wrong, evil, good. But but I can kind of apprehend it.
Yes. And it's archetypal, maybe, it's like,
Exactly.
Yeah. And, it's a fascinating thing that the science of storytelling, so to speak. There's this example I used in my book, The Bigger Picture, where Stanislav Grof, who's a psychedelic researcher, was in a hot tub with Joseph Campbell in Esalen, or they were in Esalen. I just imagine that they're in a hot tub. I don't know if that's exactly where they were in the moment, but Stan Grof, if people don't know, is a pioneering psychedelic researcher from what's now the Czech Republic, and was using LSD with patients. A psychiatrist, and and Joseph Campbell he wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and was one of the first people to talk about this idea of a monomyth. Like there's a single universal story that goes through all different cultures and times. And Grof was talking about this patient he had who had a real severe death anxiety, and he was talking about his LSD therapy journey. And in it, this patient encountered a kind of pig goddess, really bizarre looking, kind of freaky, entity goddess. And Grof started describing it, and then Joseph Campbell apparently was like, "Oh, hang on, did it have this? Did it have this? Was it like this?" It was like, and then they were like, and then he was like, "Yeah, it did." He's like, "Oh, yeah, that's a there's a god, like a death goddess in a Polynesian tribe that he'd encountered, and
Wow.
this is for whatever reason, perhaps this patient in Prague with his death anxiety ends up encountering this archetypal figure from a totally different culture that he had never been in contact with before, and so that is just totally fascinating, that can happen. And of course we can look at that and we can look at the veracity of things like that, but I think there's a lot of examples of that. And I think, the Marvel movies, for example, they're powerful in part because they're, like you said, they're the new gods. They're, they're the good stories of gods effectively.
Yeah, exactly. We got a few minutes left, and I have a bunch of questions. The one that I'm most interested in is something like, what do you see this kind of sense-making orientation is missing? Another way to say it would be like, for this particular site, like what question are we probably not going to ask that we should be?
That's a good question. Well, look, there will be so many questions that we're always not asking that are practical ones if we're, trying to make sense of what's going on. But I think the more interesting thing is, like, foundationally, I think there's something very powerful about questioning all underlying assumptions often, so that's not like a full answer to your question, but I think it's more like a practice of, Ian McGilchrist, for example, has suggested that to balance out the different forms of thought that are left, like, from our left and right hemispheres, you can even do an exercise of just considering the polar opposite of what you're doing. And he said governments should do this in departments. So they'd be like, hey, we should buy 20 new school buses. And then the alternative is like, or we should have no school buses, just like some mad, just whatever. And I think there's something about breaking frame that's really crucial with all sense making, so that we continuously find a way to break frame. Now, the alternative idea doesn't even have to be a serious idea. You're not going to take away all the school buses, but what it does is it forces a reevaluation of the original idea from the other completely differently, and that could lead somewhere really interesting. So I think there's something about psychological flexibility, which is crucial in this kind of endeavor, where we never get too stuck in a rut, and we continuously try to break our cognitive biases. And there's, the best ways to do that are tried and tested, breaking frames. So like travel is an incredible way to do that. So is just like very deep conversation. So are psychedelics. So is breath work. So is going for a walk even, like that's key. Often when I'm writing, I'll stop writing. I have a dog, so I'll walk the dog. And then so much just starts to coalesce of like, oh, add this thing, or no, do this thing, like this, or this bit doesn't make sense actually. And so that's, there's also physiologically something that happens when you walk. So, I think it's more about the how than the what, really.
Yeah. I love that. That seems true. Yeah. And I love the examples too, like just something so simple, because breaking frame can sound complicated, and yet it's exactly going on a walk, or making a joke when things are serious, or being serious when things are funny.
That's nice.
Yeah,
that's really nice. Yeah, definitely. Lying on the floor is a really interesting one. I'm seeing your room from the ground. It's really weirdly powerful. It's also like you see stuff that of course you don't normally see, usually things that have fallen under the couch or something like that. But it's worth trying, because I've done it. Someone suggested it to me. I've done it a few times and been like, I don't know why, but this is definitely helping my thinking in some way. And I can do it, probably alone. Probably don't do it in Starbucks, but yeah.
I have definitely crawled on the floor of various coffee shops in ways that were generative, for sure.
Yeah, nice.
I don't even quite understand this comment, but We've got yogis will often do headstands, handstands to get a new perspective. That one I do understand.
That's
This
good.
one, please, Alexander, don't be a bull in a china shop. Explore, question, examine, engage, but do not break. Language matters.
I don't fully understand that. Maybe they could write a follow-up one in the next couple of minutes where we get it.
I think it's supposed to be playful, but we'll see.
Oh, breaking frame. Maybe it's from Breaking Frame. No, I'm definitely going to be the bull in the china shop. I want to break that. I want to break that china. It's going to be the bits of porcelain everywhere. But it's a good point. Like, in a sense, I do think that's what's needed right now in this space. Like, Jordan Hall, who people might be familiar with, who's a very smart dude. I had it when I launched Kainos, my sort of media platform. I interviewed him because we used to have him on Rebel Wisdom a lot, and he said something that stuck with me all year, and it keeps coming back to me this year as well, which is that we're living in a post-strategy age where we can't strategize. And I'm a kind of, I used to be a strategist and I love strategizing. And so it's a very interesting thing. If we take that seriously and go, okay, actually any strategy we make is not going to work because we are on an ocean and we can't see past the horizon. What do we do then? Well, then we become the kind of people who can thrive in uncertainty and thrive on an ocean for now. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's a question about what Kainos means.
Yeah, it means new in Greek, ancient Greek. And it means new. So there's neos, which is new in form, like an apple that's just grown on a tree. That's neos because apples exist. But kainos is new in the sense of like it hasn't been before, and it's like a kind of novelty, and that again is a kind of everything we've been talking about here. This idea of moving into the unknown, into a new paradigm. In my documentary Leviathan, one of the guests is Yanis Varoufakis, who is a economist and used to be he was the finance minister of Greece for a time. And so I went to Greece with a great Greek camera guy I found in London, and I had many Greek people telling me that's not how you pronounce it. And they gave me the pronunciation, and I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to do another example of just taking something that belongs to Greece and bringing it to the UK and not giving it back. But I'm going to anglicize it because I can't pronounce Greek very well. But apologies to any Greek viewers. I'm fully aware that it's a slightly different pronunciation in the Greek. Yeah.
I love that. That's beautiful. It's it reminds me of the kind of Whiteheadian creative advance into novelty, or even just like we talk about being. And often we default to like a noun instead of actually the verb form of being. There's a becoming or a movement quality to being itself. And you're like, yeah, Kainos. That's the whole of everything is a movement of newness, of novelty.
Amen to that. Yeah.
Amen. Well, nice. Can we get a couple history podcast recommendations to close?
I only listened to The Rest is History, which is incredibly good. And I probably should expand my horizons a little bit. But I've just, I kind of discovered it, I don't know, like a year ago. And I'm in all sorts of rabbit holes with it. So yeah, highly recommend that. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan. And yeah, really, really excited for you. And hope we can collaborate again in the not too distant future. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, bye.